In today's market update with John Campbell, we are covering everything that has happened across the winter livestock family of auctions this week. John hits on what has happened in Lahana this week and then auctions across the region as well. After we discuss the market update, we are diving into a very hot topic within agriculture, and that is EID tags. John has been asked a few times to discuss this and share his opinions and thoughts on it, so he does just that today. Without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into this episode with John. But before we do, if you could take a second to like, subscribe, rate, and review this episode, we would really appreciate it here at the team. Now, let's get into this episode with John. John, happy Wednesday. Welcome back to the podcast. How's the market in Lahana doing this week? Give us the update there.
Everything a little higher. This market is really resilient. I thought we had a good market last week. Light calves steady last week, but boy, they just jumped right out and probably put $5 to $10 on everything here yesterday. Again, starting to see some numbers. I think we had right at 2,200 cattle. So that's about where we'll stay till we get into our calf run here in a couple weeks, and then hopefully we'll have some 4,000 head sales that we can kind of talk about. Once again, 5 to 10 better is what I called it yesterday. Had little lightweight 3-weight steer calves up to 623, and some 4-weight steer calves bring 580. Our best 5-weight steer calves finally got north of $5, 501 on some steers weighing on top of 5. 6-weight deal I thought about steady, 420 on the best kind of handy weight steers. We had some really nice, and just 15, 18 head of them. I think we'd have got more if we'd had a load of them, but we had some real nice black steers out of New Mexico that weighed 7 and brought 395. Over on the heifer side of things, and I'm telling you about the very best, 4-weight heifers to 462 and a half. If anything would have been cheaper is probably the little light heifers, but again, you're having to put them together 3, 5, 2, 7, 9. But I thought some of the little peewee heifers may be a little softer, but as they got bigger, why, they kind of followed suit with the steers, and you'd have to call them better. I think our best 5-weight heifer, 422 and a half, 6-weight heifers up to 385, and those would have been some weaned, probably last fall calves that were dry wintered, or dry, off grass rather. And had some 7-weight heifers bring 361. That would have been quite a bit better. So I don't know, just onward and upward, I guess.
I love it. How about other auction markets that are within the winter livestock family? What you got to say there?
Really, and Dodge City is today, so it's going to be interesting. But the end of last week, and then this week, everybody called the deal about like ours. 5 to 10 better. Salina, mostly bigger cattle there. They haven't started many calves, but they had 4-weight steer, and this would have been last Thursday. So 6-weight steers up to 415, just about like our deal. 7-weight steer at 395. They sold some really nice 8-weight cattle at 376, and some big 9-weight steers at 360. So they were calling their deal last Thursday 5 to 10 better. And same way with Pratt. Again, this is kind of old news. We're 5-6 days behind. It'll be interesting to see what happens this week. But Pratt, the same thing, 8 to 10 higher. When you're old, Lauren, and you have hearing aids, while your phone comes through your hearing aids. So anyway, I hate to show my age, but I'm old. 8 to 10 better at Pratt. Had some little 360 weight steers at 622 and a half. It's really interesting how you can go across a huge area and the market is about the same. You think, what in the world is a guy buying a 350 weight steer in Salina, Kansas? How does he get on the same page as somebody buying one in Lahana, Colorado? That's always kind of fascinated me. 400-pound steers in Pratt at 572. That's within $5-6 of what we did. We had some at 480. 7-weight cattle. Now they got along a little better, but you're a little closer to the grain and closer to the feed yards. But they did have some 7-weight steers at 406 and a half. Their best 8-weight cattle in Pratt, Kansas, 377. I thought they had some impressive heifers. They got along good with the little 4-weight heifers up to 510 and had 114 head of 5-weight heifer calves at 475 that they would have been weaned and really stick out kind. Watching Riverton, Wyoming, and talking to Jeff Smith yesterday, they had their first special calf sale. And it's interesting how the prices usually start in the north, these great big prices, and then they work their way south. And I think a lot of that is because they start seeing volume earlier because they're further north. The guys naturally kind of come off the cow and come off the grass earlier just because of the weather. But they called their trend yesterday in Riverton on a little over 3,000 cattle, as much as 20 higher, and just some stick out sales from Riverton, some 4-weight steers at 586. They had some 5-weight steers bring 511 and some 6-weights at 417. So kind of in touch with everybody else. But 4-weight heifers in Pratt, Kansas at 517, which I thought was outstanding. And then they had some 5-weight heifers up to 433. So the trend around the country from Riverton, Wyoming to as far east as Salina, Kansas and Lana, Colorado, everybody kind of in that $5 to $10 a hundred better over the last 5-6 days.
Very exciting, especially considering the downward trend that we were seeing in the market last week when we were discussing this as well. So
yeah,
great to see that across the board on all fronts.
Can't get the fats off center. They closed one plant down. They were trying to remodel or, some BS story. And it's interesting now, and I think we touched on that last week, but you're looking at a 3, 4, as much as $5 premium in the South now versus the North. I mean, that just tells you they can price them, and when you're the only game in town, you can price them and buy them wherever you want to. Yeah. But it's a situation we've created, and I don't know how we get out of it, but that's where we're at.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we have a current events topic to discuss today. Would you
Yes.
like to share that?
Well,
with
some
listeners?
more input on Ask John, and I've been asked to share some views and kind of enlighten everyone on at the forefront. Kind of is the EID situation that's going on, and that's the electronic identification ear tags. And they were mandated by the USDA back last fall, November of 24. So it's something we've dealt with for a while. But a couple ranchers and some alliances and RCAF, they sued the USDA. And saying that, you can't force cattlemen to purchase and identify their own cattle with an EID tag. And the USDA, they bulled up and said that the court should, drop the rancher's case. And to the support of the court, they ruled that, the ranchers, hey, USDA, they have a good case. And we're going to grant that they can go ahead and continue with this. You can't dictate to them. They didn't say you can't dictate to them, but they said that deserves to be recognized. So anyway, I'm not an expert in court proceedings, but it did advance, and it goes up to the next level, and they're going to continue to talk about it. But kind of my views on the thing, the USDA claims that EID tags is really the answer to disease traceability. And, these are the same great minds, Lauren, that thought asphalt was a hip disease. I know, I've asked them. And their ultimate goal is to tag all your cattle. And they say that in the language. They're going to start with the breeding stock, which they have done over 18 months of age crossing state lines. But it is on their agenda that they want to get all cattle ultimately ID tagged. And, to serve as a tool for disease traceability, every cow would have to be tagged. Each individual tag would have to be scanned, documented, and then the data stored every time that cow is moved or she trades hands. Now, if you're really wanting to trace disease traceability, where has this cow landed? You know what I mean? Even if she remained in your possession, if you moved her 300 miles away, well, she's in completely different territory and still susceptible to whatever the disease may be in that specific area, whether she traded hands or not. And then most definitely, if she goes to another producer that relocates the cow at a different facility, a different ranch or whatever. The USDA mandated the tagging without any idea of hell who's going to administer the program, who's going to pay for it, and most importantly, who's going to do all the damn work. Any third grade kid would have asked those questions before making it mandatory. And we run into this constantly, time after time after time. We have the USDA or the government mandate a position, and then after the fact, we worry about, well, what's going to be the consequences of it, or who the hell's going to pay for it since the government's broke anyway. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen. And every day, there's hundreds of these transactions that take place across the United States. And do you think, the USDA has anyone present every time there's a transaction between two people to read the tags, to retag the ones that lost tags, and who's there recording all the data for every one of these transactions that takes place if you're wanting to trace disease? And the answer is no. They don't have anybody there. The USDA, they couldn't find their ass with both hands in a search warrant. I dealt with them. I know it. And the mandate at the end of the day, Lauren, is just, it's completely impossible to implement it. Their idea is, well, let's stick that job in the auction markets rectum and make them do the work. But that only accounts for about 10% of the nation's cows that trade hands. And then USDA said, well, that'll be fine. We'll close our eyes to the other 90% and claim that their work is a success story. And we've done it with back tags. We've done it with VS. I've been in all of them. Bangs. In 45 years, I've seen them all come and go. I've always said that the disease is not near as traumatic as the loss and the blow up in commerce that you have trying to implement the program that never should have, started in the first place. Or another idea that they have had is, well, let's give the brand inspectors one of these rechargeable POS wands, and we'll let them be a disease traceability officer and give them a badge. So let's put it on the brand inspectors. Well, here's a news flash. Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas, the four biggest cattle states in the United States, don't have brand inspectors. So how in the hell do you do that? Currently, what they're doing is they say, well, we'll make the veterinarians do it, and APHIS can crack the whip on those guys. That's another physical impossibility. Not everyone with cows has a silencer chute with a head catch when these vets are out running around. And you might do a price check, then grab your ass if and when the vet drives 70 miles from his chute to scan tags and write a health on 3 heifers that you sold your neighbor. I mean, Lauren, it's not going to happen. The USDA doesn't have any money. They have no concept of the disruption of commerce that they're doing. They don't have the personnel, and they have no plan whatsoever. They enact these laws and then think that somebody's going to come up with a plan for them and how to pay for it. And I've said several times and actually congratulated them on creating a pathetic solution for a problem that hell we never had in the first place. But hopefully the court will throw this entire thing out. I mean, there's potential with that for the lawsuit that's been drawn up, or, that Trump and Secretary Rollins will see the EID as, in my opinion, a complete government overreach. And I just think it's called collection and control. Try to collect as much data as you possibly can, meaning the government, the USDA, and then that gives you ultimate control. Personally, Lauren, I'm real apprehensive of any government program that collects so they can ultimately control your personal identification. So other than that, I think it's a great plan.
I would agree with a lot of the sentiment
A
that you
lot of
have
it.
in
Well,
certain
it's all true.
and in certain scenarios. See, where I am at with it is that in concept, I think that it's like, yes, we need to be able to trace diseases within the United States, within agriculture, especially with how quickly certain ones that we don't have right now, we don't have issues with, but ones that could be used to target the United States agriculture can move. I see the concept, but the execution was not done well. And I think that every single agriculturalist can agree on that. Every single rancher can agree that the execution of this program was done terribly. It was decided upon without consulting ranchers, without consulting state departments, without figuring out, like you said, an exact plan of who, where, when, why, how, all of these things. We were like, hey, we're gonna do it, figure it out.
Right.
And then all of us are sitting back of, okay, you want us to do this thing. Okay, you've made the decision without us being able to say anything about it. Whatever, we're used to it at this point. How would you like us to go about it? How are we going to be paying for these? Is this voluntary? Is this required? Is this on all of our cattle? Is it on breeding stock? Like all of these things. And then they're scrambling after implementing this program and changing their mind every single stinking week of who's going to implement it. And like you said, they were like, okay, brand inspectors, that's not their job. They've got other things that they have to do as brand inspectors. They need to add more personnel if they're going to be doing this. They need personnel that is specifically dedicated to this if that's what they're going to be doing. And the fact that like Kansas doesn't, we're not a brand state. It's completely voluntary in this state if you want a brand, but we don't have brand inspectors. So who's doing it then? And that's not the vet's job. I would much rather my vet be spending time doing things that he actually needs to be doing with his time other than scanning EID tags.
Yeah,
We
Lord.
need dedicated people to this situation. And I also, on the point of the data, I have an issue with where is this data being housed? Where is this data being housed? Who's the collection of it? And do we as ranchers have access to it? Because currently in the EID system, let's say we have cattle on a feedlot that have EIDs in. We can track their performance, where they're going, all of these different things that feedlots use EIDs for, where they're being processed. And then the feedlots can request how that animal was processed in the processing facility, everything that gets returned on them, all of that information. But the ranchers don't. Like the ranchers that sent that cattle to that feedlot don't have access to that. With this EID system, are we going to have a centralized area where all of this data is available? Are we going to have a centralized system that ranchers can see where their animals are going and where they're not? Or is this just going to be a government system? And then if it is a government system, hello, is it going to be part of the Stone Age that our current government systems are? Or is it going to be first century technology that is actually secure and actually safe?
Yeah, the problem with it is then you run into privacy issues. And I mean, personally, I don't think the government has any right knowing how many cattle I've got and where they're located at. And it's just more information that we can gather, to an ends that and you look at all these programs. What they'll do next is they'll dangle money in front of you. And I don't care if that's for buying gated pipe or some people have GPS dairy chains around their cows, and it sounds like a great deal. And I'm all for if you've taken harm because a result of a government action, you damn right, go ahead and take their money. But be very careful at what expense. Oh yeah, Warren, we'll give you a dairy milk chain with a damn lunchbox on the end of it so you can track your cows. But we want to know exactly how many cows you got and where they're at. And like I said, I don't like but I'm getting to be more of a conspiracy person all the time. But then, Lauren, pretty soon, you know what, Lauren, you got a hell of a carbon footprint there, and you haven't bought enough carbon credits. So on our federal ground or on our state ground, boy, sure looks like you need to cut back because your carbon footprint's too big. I mean, we've done the same thing with oh cripes, mistake, it leaves my mind. But with the disease in the in bulls. You've got to test all your bulls, and but then if you have, why in the world can't I think of that disease? If you've got it, why the government will come and check you out and shut you down, but you can't tell your neighbor because of privacy issues. So the guy across the fence and you saying, hey, I got VD in my cows, and as my neighbor ought to tell you, but the government's gathered all this information, but because of trick, that's what I'm thinking of. But no, we can't tell anybody. You know what I mean? Well, hell, if you're trying to be a good neighbor and you end up with it, you better damn sure tell. But because of privacy issues, why we can't? So there's just this convoluted mess that goes on with all of these government programs. And yes, it's an easy sell. Yeah, we're trying to cut back disease and this and that, but all the scrutiny goes to where they've got the heavy hand, and that's at the auction market. And am I biased? You damn right I am. But they've already claimed that only counts for 10% of the cattle. So let's come down on the auction guy's ass, and 90% of the other cattle, well, we can't handle you. Problem solved. We got the auction boys, boy. We're nipping that in the ass. And we did the same thing with vesicular stomatitis. We shut these auctions down, but in the meantime, if you got a string of rodeo bucking bulls, or if you've got your state fair straw hat on and want to be right in the parade, yeah, hell, open it wide up. But let's destroy commerce in the meantime by our actions, because that's what we can control. And to hell with the masses. And we have done absolutely zero as far as traceability of disease, because they don't have the manpower to implement the check that they just wrote. And that's the thing that's aggravating, I think, for ranchers and business people and truckers and veterinarians and the boots on the ground people, that they're mandating you do the work, and it's for what? It's all in vain. So yeah, you really got them nailed down. And even if you track them at the auction, Lauren, I sell them to you in Kansas, my 10 head of bred heifers, and you put an ad in the Thrifty Nickel and sell them 1, 2, 3 at a time to all your people. Where's the disease traceability? Repeating my point, there's no USDA person out there coming scanning your tag in the country to make sure your nephew across the state line, well, we sure want to get that tag number down because we're tracing disease here. They can't do it. It can't be done. But they think it's some big ass success story because you dropped the hammer on the auction guy.
Yeah. What is your take on disease outbreak happens in the United States? A biosecurity, something happens. Let's say another country releases something to try and attack American agriculture, specifically the cattle industry. What is your take on how we can prepare for that, handle that isn't this program? What is, like, if you were sitting down with the USDA today and having a conversation with them, what would you say to put in place of this? Because they're not just going to say we can't have anything at all. What would your thoughts on that be?
Well, whether you have the ID tag or not, you'd have to locate the proximity of where it happened. If we had something happen here, it's impossible to trace the tags. They've tried that with the back tags, and the back tags fall out. You can't read the tags, the this, the that, and I'm not meaning to avoid your question, but you don't have any. We essentially, the only traceability we would have would be if they go through the auction. Why, then we can look at who bought the cattle. We'll know where they went. We'll know the trucker that hauled them and where the cattle were unloaded at. And but if they're commingled, why, at the feedlot or where, but you will at least isolate that. Here in Colorado, we have a brand law. So then we can do a further narrow down to by the brand, and the brand will stay with them forever. It won't fall off. You can always read it. And so I guess that would be my answer. That's what we've relied on in the past. Could it happen? Yes, it could. But we're throwing worthless dollars into an answer. As I said, as of now, yeah, we don't have a problem. But in your scenario, say we do. Well, I'm just here to tell you an EID tag will trace it back only to the guy that put the tag in the calf, because you're not breeding the tag. Answer is to that problem, you're not, let me finish my story. You're not reading the tag at every transaction. So, Lauren, it comes back to you. You put the tag in, you know, so, Lauren, what's the gig? But this where we trail it back to. We don't know that it's traded on average 4 times after it leaves your ranch. That animal bounces 4 times, but we've got no traceability on those other 4 times. So it comes back to you. Well, hell, you ain't got any problem, but I guarantee you will be under the microscope, because I've seen it with VS, I've seen it with bangs, I've seen it with a lot of things. Trick, another thing, comes back to you. Hell, you don't have a problem. You're clean as a pin. But we're going to quarantine you and run your ass through the ringer and test every cow, every bull you own 3 times until we get a negative test, just so we can find out you're not the one. Now, maybe you are, but if you are, so be it. But their program is flawed in the way they're trying to implement it. It's ridiculous. That, and they want an individual ID number on every cow. You cannot put a series. If your cows are number 1 through number 100, I would think that would be good enough. That'll bring you back. But they want every individual ID tag on that health certificate. So the vet is forced to cross-reference a visible tag with the EID tag. Because you sold 4 cows to this guy, 1 to this guy, 7 to this guy, 3 to that guy, and he's got to then, if those leave the state, go back in and read every one of those tags. Find your one out of those 4. So he's got guys out there with a flashlight shining on the visible ID tag and then cross-referencing it with the tag in the ear, because before the cattle are sold, we don't know if they're going out of state or not, or which part of them is going out of state. So it's just such a disruption in commerce that it's impossible to do. And what they'll do, they'll just choke it down so tough in the auction that you can't comply. And I know that gets quite a ways away from your original question, but I do not know what the answer is to your question, but I do know that traceability, and if you're just going to rely on EID tags, you ain't going to find it that way either.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. That there isn't necessarily a perfect answer that anyone could have to that question, but we need to not rely only on traceability. It is a flawed program. It is a flawed execution. And I hope that our current administration can recognize that and can see the flaws in the execution of it and go back to the discussion table, bring some ranchers, some people that are actually going to be impacted to this discussion table, to this round table, and actually hear from the auction market owners, from the ranchers, from our truckers, from our processors, and have that conversation of what is something and a solution that we can come to that actually works for every single phase of the animal and how they move throughout this industry, that isn't going to be putting anyone out on their ass at the
Lauren,
end of the day.
you are so correct, and I can qualify that. And the reason I am so disgusted in that I have been in this position for 45 years, and not once, not one time, not that I know anything, but we represent a pretty big stake in merchandising and the biggest auction in Colorado. Never, ever, not once have I been consulted or approached about what would be your input about how we implement XYZ program. Could you give us a little, I know I sound pretty belligerent, but I've got half a brain, and which is more than most of the people, I guess, that are implementing this program. But ask the veterinarian, ask the auction guy, ask the trucker, the boots on the ground people that are the people you're saying are going to implement this program. What a concept. Maybe ask them. what the hell is good about it and bad about it. I'm not saying it's all bad, but when you've got a shotgun approach from some USDA guy that has no appreciation of how it affects commerce, he's a hell of a guy to mandate something to all the people that are going to implement the program, and then they wonder why in the hell it doesn't work. And oh yeah, one other thing we forgot about who's going to pay for it. Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Completely ridiculous. And I'm not telling you, I can name off program after program after program that we have been mandated, forced to implement here, and we have not been able to say one word of implementing the program, whether good or bad. And that's government in general. Why don't you go to the people that are actually doing the work, and maybe they would have some small amount of input into what is the best way to administer what you're dictating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that. And I think that is a perfect place to round out today's episode and to sum it all up in the fact that, do John and I have a perfect answer for it? No, we do not have a perfect answer for it. But at the end of the day, I think all we're asking for is our voices as agriculturalists, as producers, to be heard and to be heard around the discussion table. And hopefully that this can be something that, unfortunately, it had to come to a lawsuit. It had to come to a lawsuit for our voices to be heard and for someone to see the injustice in this program and in the implementation of this program. So hopefully we can sit back down around the discussion table and come to an agreement that works best for everyone across all sectors of this industry. John, thank you for your insight, for your thoughts, for your time. To all of our listeners, this is the CattleUSA Daily Podcast. I'm Lauren Moylan, your host. Thank you for listening. We will see you all tomorrow on another episode. Have a good one, y'all.